Namaste. I am 𝐻 Manohar. Presently, I am working as the Research Director at the Amrita School of Ayurveda, the Amrita 𝑉𝐸𝐬𝐵 University based in Kollam, Kerala. I will be talking about the approach to research that we can learn by a careful study of the classical Ayurvedic texts. The title of my talk is Research Roadmap, Ayurvedic Perspectives. Generally, there is a misconception that, Ayurveda is a belief system and it has basically been discovered, by the sages in ancient times and then passed on from generation to generation like a belief system. And it is only in recent times that we are introducing research to make Ayurveda more acceptable in the modern world. So the general feeling is that research is something that has to be introduced from outside. And so in modern times, we have also seen a lot of research programs being developed for modernizing Ayurveda, and it has all amounted to borrowing and applying the research methods that are used in modern medicine to validate Ayurveda. So at the outset, I would like to point out my opinion that Ayurveda has never been a belief system. It has always been nurtured and developed and propagated as a knowledge system. And even though well-defined methods of research are not found, as a distinct individual independent discipline within the tradition of Ayurveda, what we could call as research, or if we would define research as a search for knowledge, as a process of validating, systematizing knowledge, then definitely we can see the clear presence of research approaches in the classical Ayurvedic textbooks. We know today that all research begins with what is called as a research question. The process of research then is to devise a way through which we collect data through very careful observation, and then by analyzing that data, we try to find an answer to the research question. It's interesting that in the whole tradition of Ayurveda, especially the old classical texts, the discourse between the teacher and the student is in the form of questions and answers. In fact, in many of the chapters of Charaka Samhita, we see that the teaching begins only when the student asks a question. So this concept of, questioning, seeking knowledge through the process of questioning has been an integral part of the learning tradition of Ayurveda. And this is one point that I want to make very clearly here, that in Ayurveda, it looks like the very method of learning itself was based on a research orientation. I mean, the student was researching the subject even as he or she was learning the subject. At the beginning, I want to talk a few things about why Ayurveda is a knowledge system, even though it does not completely fit into the modern definition of what should be science or scientific. This is because Ayurveda is based on a very different epistemological framework, and even its ontological positioning is different when we compare it with that of modern medicine or modern science. If we were to understand better what these terms mean, epistemology means the ways of knowing. How do we know? How do we generate knowledge by interacting and experiencing the world, both the physical and the mental and the deeper, inner spiritual experiences? How do we generate knowledge out of this experience? That is epistemology. And ontology deals with what are the objects of the knowledge? What do we consider as worthy of investigation for the generation of knowledge? And it is in this epistemological and ontological framework that Ayurveda differs from modern science or modern medicine. So both are knowledge systems. Ayurveda is not a belief system, but as a knowledge system, it is different from modern science because epistemologically, it also emphasizes the importance of, subjective modes of knowing. Subjective modes of knowing with the inner instrument of the mind, where it is not in contact with the sense objects. In other words, and for this reason, the ontological premise of Ayurveda is also different. We accept that there are entities, there are domains of experience that go beyond the scope of the five senses. So there are things that we cannot measure with the use of our sense organs, and they are also considered to be existing. Ayurveda also accepts pratyaksha or direct observation as one of the most powerful tools of knowing. If observation was not part of Ayurveda, pratyaksha would not have been a very dominant pramana. In fact, not only in Ayurveda but also in the learned traditions of the darshanas, this point has been very well emphasized. For example, Adi Shankaracharya, one of the foremost thinkers in the Indian philosophical tradition, points out that observation cannot be contradicted by scriptural authority. Nacha pratyaksha virodhe shrutehe pramanyam. He says that when the Shruti or the Vedic text or a scriptural injunction contradicts your own observation, then you cannot accept that statement as true. Svavishaya shurani pramanani. Each of the pramana is strong and powerful in its own domain. So he goes on to clarify that nahi shruti shatamapi shitognihi aprakasha iti bruvat pramanyam labhate. Even if 100 Vedic texts tell that fire is cold and dark, we cannot accept it because it contradicts our perception and experience. So knowledge building begins by careful observation. So pratyaksha pramana is very elaborately discussed in Ayurveda, and Ayurveda is very much developed through careful observations, which in modern research parlance we would say as data compiled through rigorous research methodologies. However, there is a limit to observation. There is a limit to direct observation. Even in modern science, a lot of our knowledge about the universe, about our own bodies, is not fully generated out of direct observation. There are some very careful conclusions, inferential conclusions, and modeling that we do based on what has been observed. We also understand about what cannot be observed. And this is called as anumana. Anumana means anupaschadmanam, that measuring or discerning or identifying the existence of entities in the universe based on perception, but then also acknowledging the fact that there are things that are beyond the ken of human perception. So pratyaksham alpam, analpam hi aprathyaksham. This is a very important tenet in the epistemological positioning of Ayurveda, that everything in the universe cannot be known by observation, just by observation alone. We may have to go from observation to observation-based inference. This is a very, very important distinction between pratyaksha and anumana. Pratyaksha is always given a very important positioning here, that anumana cannot be just a logic in the mind. It is pratyaksha purvam, as Charaka clarifies, pratyaksha purvam trividham trikalam cha anumiyate. So anumana is always based on pratyaksha. You cannot just imagine something in your mind and then say this exists because of a certain logic. Anumana is always proposed on the basis of very clear observation. So that is what we mean by saying that pratyaksha cannot be easily denied. If you want to explain or the existence or even announce or justify the existence of something that cannot be physically verified, then you're going into a third domain. So the first we have pratyaksha, observation based. The second we have inference based on observation. And in the third phase, which is aptopadesha or shruti, the domain of shruti, which is dealing with more of subjective experiences, which are not so easily, verifiable by direct observation. There, we are not based on pratyaksha. So shruti is acceptable or aptopadesha is acceptable as long as it is not contradicted by direct observation, and it is giving you an experience that transcends the realm of sensory perception. So this is the epistemological framework on which Ayurveda has been built up. And we can say that if you look at the epistemology of Ayurveda, the difference from modern science is that Ayurveda is more accommodative. Ayurveda begins with observation but also goes beyond observation. And that is why ontologically, as you can see in this slide, we divide the world of our experiences into three categories: the tangible, the partially tangible, and intangible. So there is vyakta, there is vyakta vyakta, and then there is what is completely avyakta. So the vyakta realm of our experience can be understood. We can interact with it in a very tangible manner. This is the domain of pratyaksha. The vyakta vyakta, partly observational and partly inferential, is the domain of anumana, partially tangible. And then we have the pure world of subjective experiences, which is intangible, which comes from an elevated state and a very refined and developed state of the human mind. This is the intangible or avyakta realm. So at the outset, when we talk about research in Ayurveda and when we think about bringing in modern scientific tools, it's very important for us to understand that these ontological differences have to be kept in mind. So the whole world is divided into the three layers of the tangible, partially tangible, and intangible. And we use the three instruments of perception, perception-based inference, and then subjective, deep, intuitive insights to develop the knowledge of Ayurveda. And if you look at the tradition, the whole method of teaching Ayurveda was based on this idea, on this framework of the pramanas and the prameyas. So when we look at research in Ayurveda, this is a topic that is studied at the very outset. I want to point out that research was fundamental in studying any system of knowledge in the Indian tradition. You can see that there is this verse, Kanadam Paniniyam cha Sarva Shastrobhakarakam. So language and the scientific method, the logical method of reasoning was a prerequisite to study any discipline of knowledge in the Indian tradition. And so that is why that helps us to, this is called Tarka Shastra, or the method of logical reasoning, which we can, in some way correlate with the modern idea of research methodology. So no subject was studied in ancient India unless you had some hold of language. You need to be very clear in your expressions. You need your thought, your thinking, as well as your speech had to be refined before you started the study of any subject. So research methodology was fundamental. The students would learn about Tarka, would learn about the Pramanas, would learn about the Prameyas, and only then they would study the subject. This was true not only for Ayurveda, but also for all other disciplines, including music. So the idea here is that this is what we need to bring back into our education. The subject called Padartha Vijnanam is actually wrongly classified as a philosophy. Of course, the reason why Padartha Vijnanam tends to get classified as philosophy is because of the broadness of our epistemological and ontological framework. It's only because we deal with Pratyaksha, Anumana and Aptopadesha, covering the Vyakta, Vyakta and Vyakta, Vyakta realms. We also include entities or domains of experience like self, consciousness. This makes it appear like a philosophical system. But it's important that Pratyaksha is very, very central to this whole method of knowledge creation. And so we must reinterpret and understand that it is through this deeper study of Padartha Vijnana that we can truly develop a research methodology that is relevant for Ayurveda. If you look at the history of research in Ayurveda in modern times, it began with the visitors from the European nations who came to India and started looking at our own traditions. They were the first people to document some of the Ayurvedic practices. Then historians began to study about Ayurveda, and then we had ethnobotanists and ethnopharmacologists who started studying about Ayurvedic drugs to get clues to develop new medicines. And then we had anthropologists studying it, sociologists studying it from a sociological perspective. And today we have also scientists working on it, like, we have the Ayurveda biology concept proposed by Professor M.S. Valiathan and people like Dr. Bhushan Patwardhan. They are all people from modern, scientific field. Professor Ashok Vaidya, who proposed the idea of reverse pharmacology. So if you look at the whole history of research and development in Ayurveda, it has been initiated not from within the Ayurvedic community, but from outside. There's always been outsiders who have proposed how Ayurveda should be researched upon. We have not yet been able to present to the world our own original method of research. The real way in which Ayurvedic knowledge was actually developed and how the knowledge system of Ayurveda was created. So my talk here is trying to focus on this possibility of, harvesting a new method of research that will not dismiss modern research methodologies, but will incorporate them into a framework of research that is fundamentally based on the classical Ayurvedic system of thought. So in this slide, I'm going to just point out how these three domains of ontological, categorization, the Vyakta, 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 and Avyakta. This framework will help us really to place modern methods of research in the right context. Otherwise, we tend to reduce Ayurveda to modern science. So in the Vyakta realm, we have the body, the gross aspect of our existence. We have the doshas. This domain is called as Adi Bhautika. This is the domain of Arogya, or absence of disease. This is the domain of intervention with medical intervention for cure. And here we can relate to physical sciences, biology, medicine. This is what a modern scientist would call as hard science. This is hardcore science. So it's important to understand that Ayurveda accepts science because the Vyakta domain, the role of pratyaksha or direct observation is well accepted. So Ayurveda does not have any conflict with science, but the issue here is that Ayurveda goes beyond this realm. Ayurveda accepts hard science, but Ayurveda clearly says that it is not the limit. I mean, that's not the end. We need to go beyond it. I'm using the word Ayurveda in first person, but I would also like to point out that, Ayurveda is not a person. I mean, Ayurveda is a collection of thoughts from so many people. So when I say Ayurveda accepts, I'm talking about consensus. I mean, definitely there is a consensus within the classical Ayurvedic texts that we have to accept, reality beyond what is Vyakta. So this is also the domain of Yukti Vyapashraya Chikitsa, where, on the basis of Yukti or a well-defined rational logical algorithm, the physician plans a treatment. This is based on observational science. And then we have the domain of Vyakta Vyakta, which deals with the mind. The mind is partially visible, partially invisible. Partially visible in the sense we can observe the activities of the mind. We can infer that a mind exists, but we cannot really capture it. So then this is the subtle realm of reality. Here we encounter, the expressions of the mind like the sattva, rajas and tamas. This is called as the domain of adhidaivika. This is also the domain of swasthya or health, which is opposed from arogya. Arogya means only absence of disease, whereas swasthya is the establishment of a higher state of well-being. It's not something which can be achieved through the mind. It's through the body alone. It's something that is achieved only when the mind also comes into play. That is why it comes in the realm of Vyakta Vyakta. This is also the realm of disciplines like psychology, sociology, anthropology. So this is what we would call as the soft sciences. The soft sciences, even in modern scientific thinking, psychology, anthropology, they are not considered as hardcore sciences because they deal more with subjective elements of human experience. And this is also the domain of Daiva Vyapashraya. Then we have the realm of intangible reality, that is Avyakta, completely invisible to our senses and our ordinary modes of experience. This is the domain of the inner self. This is the realm of the causal body as it has been described in the Vedanta. This is the realm of human consciousness or Chetana, the idea or our fundamental experience that I am. In the Indian tradition, we say, I am, therefore I think. But in the Western tradition, the slogan is, I think, therefore I am. The mind has been given primacy over consciousness, whereas in our tradition, consciousness is primary. This is the domain of Adhyatmika and of Yoga. So once you have a state of wellness in the mind, you can uplift yourself to an even more higher level of, inner unfoldment and awareness, union with your inner self, and that is the realm of yoga. This is the domain that deals with knowledge systems, spirituality and parapsychology. This deals with wellness now rather than health. So we have life at the level of the Vyakta, we have health at the level of Vyakta Vyakta, and wellness at the level of Avyakta. This is the realm of trance science. These are domains of experience which are not so fully understandable by modern methods of investigation because, they go beyond the scope of the sensory experiences. And this is where Ayurveda talks about Sattvavajaya. So even the scope of treatment in Ayurveda, scope of knowing, the scope of our experiences is quite broad. So we have, and this is the reason why in Ayurveda, treatments, interventions are based on three strategies: the strategy of control, the strategy of harmony, and the strategy of balance. So when you are working at the level of Vyakta, we have the idea of control. When we are working at the level of Vyakta, we have the strategy of harmony. And when you go into the domain of Avyakta, we have the strategy of balance. So this is the way Ayurveda has defined itself as a knowledge system. And we have to create knowledge that covers all these three domains of human experience. And in the rest of my talk, I would like to discuss about how the ancient masters, teachers, went about this method of knowledge creation using a rigorous methodology which we could rediscover and develop as the foundation of research in Ayurveda in modern times. So, I would like to now illustrate the point that I was making, that in Ayurveda, the study of research methodology through Tarka Shastra, the method of knowledge creation, preceded the study of the subject. So, which means that the students studied the subject with a research bent of mind, with a mind that was questioning, inquiring, and discovering new knowledge. And how does the Ayurvedic text explain this process? In the Charaka Samhita in Vimanasthanam, Charaka says, Purvam aptobadeshad jnanam. Jnanavadam dvidha pariksha. Pratyaksha anumanabhyam dvidha pariksha. So, the idea here is that Charaka very clearly distinguishes jnana and vijnana. That is mentioned in many contexts in the Charaka Samhita. That jnanam is something that we develop by studying aptopadesha. Jnanam is, updating your knowledge based on what has been discussed by the authorities. It's not knowledge that you have experienced or internalized. So it's so important that you first study what the teachers, the people before us, whatever they have acquired, whatever knowledge they have systematically compiled and preserved, we need to first become updated with that. And this is what is called as jnana. If you have read the aptopadeshas thoroughly, then you become a jnani. And once you have the jnana of aptopadesha, and this is where I want to point out that Ayurveda is not a belief system. It's a knowledge system, because the texts clearly emphasize that if you acquire jnana, then you have to do pariksha. That you have to investigate, you have to verify, you have to validate what you have learnt by reading the text. And that is why Charaka emphasizes that jnanavatam vividha pratyaksha anumanabhyam pariksha. So for a person who is knowledgeable of the aptopadeshas, they have to verify what they have learned by pratyaksha as well as anumana. So by aptopadesha we move to jnana, and from jnana to pratyaksha and anumana we reach a stage of vijnana. And that is why jnana and vijnana are to be acquired together. And this was the process of education. First we study the method of tarka, you learn the pramanas, then you read the aptopadeshas thoroughly, and then you develop jnana. And with jnana, you apply the pramanas of pratyaksha and anumana, and then you acquire vijnana. And with the vijnana, you are translating this knowledge into actual practice. This is called as yukti. So that is why only a person who has vijnana can cultivate yukti. And after you have verified and experienced this knowledge of aptopadesha to pratyaksha and anumana and your own yukti, because now you become capable of applying the knowledge in newer and different situations. So that innovation comes only when you can do the yukti of the vijnana that you have acquired. And when you have become established in the yukti or application of this knowledge, then you become a tantrakarta or you become an apta yourself. And what you have written then becomes the basis for initiating a new knowledge cycle. So this is the process of knowledge creation, and have just kind of illustrated this through a flow chart, a flow diagram here in the slide. We can see here the starting point, the beginning point is Aptopadesha. And this Aptopadesha is very similar to the modern idea of review of literature. Even in modern scientific discourse, the first thing that a researcher has to do is to review all the research articles that have been published in that particular field and get updated. Your knowledge has to be updated. As they say, we are sitting on the shoulders of giants. This is the tradition. This is the great tradition of knowledge. It's the experience of generations of people who have toiled hard to construct this knowledge that is being passed on to the new generation through the process of Aptopadesha. And today, Aptopadesha is in the form of research papers, which are authoritative, which are peer-reviewed. And as you can see in Charaka Samhita, it is said that a good Shastra is a Shastra which is peer-reviewed. Tatrayan manyeta sumahat yashasvi dhira purusha sevitam aptajana pujitam. So people who are domain experts have been using that knowledge and verified it. And they are also endorsed by the authorities in the field. So only peer-reviewed literature was accepted. And this is what 𝐷𝑉𝐸𝑎𝑔𝑏hada also means when he says, Rishi pranite pritischet muktva charaga sushrutau bhedadhyaha kimna pathyande tasmat grahyam subhashitam. So only that becomes Shastra which has been well explained, which has been peer-reviewed and accepted. So study of peer-reviewed literature, which we call as Aptopadesha, takes you to a stage where you get domain knowledge. Even though you do not have experience of the subject, you know the terrain. It's like now you know the map, you know where you have to go, you can identify the gaps. So this state of having domain knowledge is called as jnana. Purvam aptopadeshad jnanam. This is what Charaka says. And once you have jnanam, tata pratyaksha anumanabhyam pariksha upapadyade. So once you have jnana, and this is exactly what we would call as an investigation in modern, research parlance. So once you have the Aptopadesha, then you start questioning. Questioning was very much the way of learning in Ayurvedic tradition. The षड्विध Vyakhyana, or of understanding Aptopadesha, says that padarthoda padacheda vakyartho vakyayojana akshepotha samadhanam vyakyanam षड्विधam madham. So the Vyakhyana of Aptopadesha is done in 6 steps. That is, you study the word by word, padartha, padacheda, breaking the words, you understand word meaning. Vakyartha, that is understanding the meaning sentence by sentence, and then putting all these together and then refuting. You can challenge, you can question, that's called as akshepa. You can question all the writings in the text, not just for the sake of questioning, but with the purpose of understanding. You can go deep into why is it like this, why is it not like this. You have the freedom to do this akshepa. Akshepa actually means to criticize, to critically look at, to refute what is written in the text. And then your understanding deepens by getting the samadhana, or when you get the answers for your questions. That is when the teaching becomes complete. So this idea of posing a question based on review of literature or Aptopadesha, and then finding an answer or a samadhana. This is exactly the method of research which we also see in modern science. I'm not going to say that because of this, the modern method of research and the Ayurvedic approach of knowledge creation are the same. What I meant to say is that fundamentally, we can see the same broad approach in knowledge creation in both the Ayurvedic tradition and the modern scientific traditions. It's only in the details. It's only in the, finer aspects of the epistemological and ontological considerations that Ayurveda differs from modern science. So here, tata pratyaksha anubhanabhyam parikshopabhadyade. So pratyaksha means observation, collecting the data. So based on what you have studied from the text, you are now examining, can I verify whatever is written in the text by my own experience, my own practical experience. This is pratyaksha. And this is why 𝐴CÀRA also tells us that Ayurveda is 𝐴𝐵𝐺𝑚. And many people misinterpret it by saying that we must not analyze the text, we must believe it. No, that's not the fact, because 𝐴CÀRA tells two conditions. Idam agama siddhatvat pratyaksha bhala darshanat. Because this has been verified again and again, and you are able to practically experience the truth of what is written in the text, there is no need of further analysis. And 𝐴CÀRA mentions this at the end of the text, which means the student has completed the study with such thoroughness that the student does not need to have any more doubt whether this knowledge system is reliable or not. That was the perfection with which the student was taught in those days. By the end of the learning program, the student becomes so confident that he is able to say that I can use Ayurveda like a mantra now, because I know that it works. So what we don't understand is that it is in the learning process itself that we do all this verification. So pratyaksham tu khalu tadyat swayam indriyer manassacha upalabhyade. So it includes both the subjective and objective observations that we make, and it is an inference based on perception is the next phase. So we first understand whatever can be directly observed, and then we go into the domain of what goes beyond normal perception, that is anumana. Anumanam khalu tarko yukti-apekshaha. Which means that, yukti here means the relationship between two variables, what is visible and what is invisible. If I am observing the existence of something, for example, a symptom of a disease, and then I infer that because I see this symptom, which is pratyaksha, I am making the anumana that there is a particular dosha kopa existing. Because there is shula, there is vata vaigunya. Shulam narte nilat, or shulam tu viguno nila. So this has been arrived at through a process of rigorous observation, where they did this tarka, that whenever there is shula, there is vata vaigunya. Whenever there is vata vaigunya, there is shula. This is the yukti, the correlation between vata vaigunya and shula, which we arrive at through a process of tarka. In this way, the knowledge of Ayurveda has been built up through pratyaksha and anumana, and then we get into the stage of vijnanam. So vijnanam is validated knowledge. So now the student at the end of the course becomes a vijnani. So there are two phases in the learning of Ayurveda. After you have studied tarka, so Sanskrit and tarka, the first prerequisites, then you study the aptopadesha of Ayurveda, you become a jnani. And then using that jnana, you do pratyaksha anumana and you become a vijnani. And then you enter into the third phase of training. How do you apply this vijnana to solve actual problems? This is the translational part, and this is called as yukti. So if we do a treatment and we get a result, it's important for us to establish that the result came because of our treatment and not by chance. This is a very interesting point in the Charaka Samhita, which clearly tells us that we had a research outlook and we were truth seekers. Charaka poses the question, Vina tarkena ya siddhi yadrichha siddhirevasa. If you get a positive result, but if you cannot understand or explain how and why it happened, then it is chance effect. Na chatra vaidyaha roga pramokshe karanam. Chakrapani clarifies this, that in such a condition, the Vaidya is not the cause for, cure of the disease. So he distinguishes two types of success, that is pratiniyamiki siddhi, which is caused definitely by your treatment. If the treatment was not there, then the patient would not have become cured or better. If in spite of your treatment, even if there was no treatment, the patient would have become cured, then it means it is 𝑦𝐻𝑑𝑟𝑐𝐴 or chance effect. So this is very, very interesting. In Ayurveda, it was imperative, at least Charaka was very clearly mentioning that every clinician had to justify through tarka how and why his treatment worked. He had to prove that the Ayurvedic treatment that was given to the patient worked not out of chance, but really because of the effect of the medicines. And this is why I believe that research in Ayurveda should start from the clinic, because we have a system of continuing clinical practice. This is why, as it has been discussed in many learned fora and amongst learned people, that evidence in Ayurveda is generated out of clinical practice. So if every physician starts very carefully documenting the results of their own practice, giving the proof that yes, there was a positive or negative outcome, and whether their own treatment was actually responsible, and if so, how it was responsible. This logical presentation of treatment outcomes will be the foundation for future research in Ayurveda. In fact, in my opinion, we must develop a method of research, clinical research, where unless a physician is able to present 10 or 20 cases of success, no further research should be encouraged. In modern science, we have an opposite method. You first test in cells, in lab, in vitro, in vivo, in animals. Then you have some preliminary evidence based on which you are proposing a research study. But in Ayurveda, it is the opposite. If you have treated a certain number of cases successfully, then based on that, because Ayurveda already has an ongoing clinical practice, you can generate preliminary evidence directly from the patient. And this is exactly what Charaka is telling here, 𝑠ِද්ධِर्ْيُක්ْتौ pratisthita. That is, you have to show that your siddhi was pratiniyamiki and not yadricha siddhi. And when you have experienced the power of Ayurvedic knowledge, that it can actually solve human problems in real life situations, then you become, an accomplished physician. And with that accomplishment, you can yourself add to the Aptopadesha. You write your own text and confirm that the teachings of Ayurveda are true. Ayurveda is a unique knowledge system because we had a system of the student writing the text. In fact, the first and the most celebrated textbook of Ayurveda is just the notes of Agnivesh. It is a student's note that became the Charaka Samhita, which is now the cardinal treatise of classical Ayurvedic thought. Why was this system there? Why did people have to keep writing text? Today we say in modern research that publications are so important. You have to publish or perish. In Ayurveda also this concept was there. Sthityartham Ayurvedasya Teda Tantrani Chakrire. The tradition of Ayurveda is powerful because, it has been handed over countless of generations. And every time a new text was written, until maybe a few centuries ago, the text was written based on the personal experience of the latest disciple in the tradition. So it was always the disciple who wrote the text after thoroughly studying the science. So here, when it comes to Tantra Rachana, we complete the whole process of knowledge building, reviewing literature to composing a new literature. From reviewing research papers to writing your own research paper, this completes the cycle of research. And that is what I have actually presented here through this flow chart. And here it is, in a little bit more visibility. And if you look at the steps one by one and compare it with modern science, Aptopadesha corresponds to literature review, Jnanam to updating of the knowledge by literature review, Pariksha is posing research question and developing hypothesis. Pratyaksha is observation and data collection. Anumana is data analysis and interpretation. Vijnanam is the state where you have validated knowledge. Yukti is applying, translating this knowledge into actual clinical practice. And Tantra Rajana is publication. So in this way, this is the general framework of research that we can see in the tradition of Ayurveda, and I want to present this as a template for us to start thinking and developing our own unique methodology for research that will accept modern scientific methods but will use it appropriately in the right context so that we can present Ayurveda to the world as a robust, multidimensional knowledge system.